Spirit. Amen. So travel back in time with me, if you would. Let's go back to when you were a teenager, say 17 years old. Now, I know some of y'all are teenagers right now, and that's okay. What I'm about to say doesn't apply to you directly now, but listen carefully, because you might discover something that will surprise you. Okay? Pay attention. So all of us grown-ups, back when we were teenagers, we all had these kind of ideas, thoughts, dreams maybe, about what our life might be like, how the events of our life would play out, or at least some general ideas. I remember talking to my good friend John. We were outside, and I said, man, I am here to tell you that when I graduate from college, I'm going to work outside. There is no way that I'm going to spend all day inside like we do at school. I will go absolutely bonkers. That's what I said. Maybe you can remember having thoughts like that. Maybe you can remember thinking that, okay, when I grow up, I want my life to fill in the blank. So let me ask you, did things work out the way that you thought they would? Did things work out the way you hoped they would? No, yeah. That's how life is. We think it's going to be one way when we're a teenager, but real life sometimes is different. Well, this week, or last week rather, we met a teenage boy. He was 17 years old. His name was Joseph. And I'm here to tell you that in a million zillion years, Joseph could not have dreamed what his life would be like as an adult. Joseph is his name. Joseph is a major figure in the greatest story ever told, which of course is the Bible. And for several weeks now, we have been looking at this great story. We've been in the process, and we're going to continue on from the beginning, all the way to the end. Now, the Bible's a big book, and this examination is going to take some time. And so somewhere along the way, we may take a break or two, sort of a word from your sponsor kind of thing. But we're going to do this. We're going to look at the whole Bible from beginning to end. Why? Because the Bible provides us with answers to the most important questions in life. And in the life of Joseph, we will see how God is both the Lord of history and how he also is engaged intimately in the lives of his people. Now, as we consider that, how God was there in Joseph's ups and downs, you might be able to look back at your own life to this point, and maybe you'll be able to see how God has been there with you too. Even if your adult life now isn't anything like you imagined when you were 17 years old. Okay, let's take a look. So just to review, Joseph was the youngest of 12 brothers. And the dad, named Jacob, Jacob he didn't favor Joseph. He loved Joseph more than any of the other brothers. And he didn't even try to hide it. So as you might expect, Joseph ended up being a spoiled brat jerk. And so, for example, whenever any of his brothers might have done something wrong, what did Joseph do? He ran to Daddy. And he said, hey, you're not going to believe what my brother, your son, did. Brothers, of course, hated Joseph for that. Well, their hatred finally boiled over when Dad gave Joseph a special, fancy, colorful coat. Hey, guys, look what Dad gave me. Pretty cool, huh? You got yours too, right? Oh, never mind. Well, at that point, the brothers had had enough of this spoiled brat jerk, and they decided to kill Joseph by throwing him into a pit. And that is where we find Joseph today, at the bottom of a deep pit, alone, probably injured, and certainly scared. Alone, hurting, scared. I expect many, if not most of us, have been there at some point in our life. Maybe not in a physical pit, but maybe in a pit of despair. But were you really alone there? I don't think you were. No, in fact, I know you weren't alone if you're a follower of Jesus. Jesus told his disciples something really important. He said, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. I am with you always. Whether you are on a mountaintop where everything is all butterflies and rainbows, or whether you're in the pit and things are dark and scary, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are not alone. He is with you, wherever you are, all the time. It might not feel like it, but he is there. And to know this is huge. Listen up. This I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. Say that with me, will you? This I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. Do you know what that means? It means that if God is for you, you are gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. No matter what is going on in your life, you're gonna be okay because God is with you. Now, I doubt that Joseph, when he was down at the bottom of that pit, I doubt that Joseph really felt that way. But God was with him. God had other plans for him. Here's what happened. Not long after his brothers dumped him there to die in the pit, a caravan of traders appeared. And one of the brothers, Judah, said, hey, I got an idea, guys. Let's just sell Joseph to these traders, and then we'll be rid of him, and we'll get some money too. What do you think? And they said, heck yeah, everybody agreed. And the next thing that Joseph knew, he was being pulled out of the dark pit into the bright sunlight. And he was locked, his feet and his neck, by chains, shackles. And he was put into a rolling cage. Everything that Joseph knew ever in his life was now gone. And ahead of him was a life of slavery in Egypt. But I wonder if you noticed something in our reading today from Genesis. Let me refresh your memory. The Lord was with Joseph. Sound familiar? Hello? We just talked about that. Hope you were listening. God's people are never alone. When Joseph was in the pit, when Joseph was sold as a slave, you can bet that Joseph felt like he was all alone. But he wasn't. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph when he was in the pit. The Lord was with Joseph when he was on the rolling cart going to Egypt as a slave. The Lord was with Joseph when he got to Egypt. And do you remember what happened when Joseph got to Egypt? Joseph landed on his feet. Now remember, Joseph could have been put to work as an agricultural laborer, spending his life in the fields under the hot Egyptian sun. Or Joseph could have been a construction worker under the supervision of a cruel Egyptian foreman, a foreman with a ready whip. But instead, Joseph was purchased by a guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar was a man of wealth and standing. And Potiphar, when he looked at Joseph, probably recognized something different. Joseph probably didn't look like the rest of those people who were offered by the slave traders. Joseph was clearly well educated, and he had more potential than the other slaves in all likelihood. So Potiphar bought Joseph and took him home to be a household servant. Well, over time, young Joseph grew up. And with the Lord's leading and guidance, everything that Joseph did worked. He was successful in everything that he did. So Potiphar, he gave Joseph more and more and more responsibility until finally, Potiphar made him, Joseph, overseer of his house and put Joseph in charge of all that he had. Now remember, this was an agricultural economy. And so in all likelihood, Joseph oversaw everything going on around the homestead of Potiphar, but also all of his lands and crops and herds and workers. We're talking about a lot of authority. We're talking about a lot of power. And we're talking about a lifestyle that Joseph could never have imagined when he was in that pit or when he was in chains on the way to Egypt. Now that would be a great God story if it ended there. A spoiled brat jerk, saved from the bottom of a dark pit, becomes a mature, competent adult, living a comfortable, meaningful life, working for a kind, trusting master. Yay, God! But the story doesn't end there. Before we go on, though, let me remind you of something. Let me remind you of who Joseph was. Joseph was the great-grandson of Abraham. And that's huge because of a promise that God gave Abraham. God told Abraham, he said, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And you and all the families of the earth will be blessed. So this was the way that God was going to fix this broken world. God would begin with one man, Abraham, and then working through Abraham's descendants from generation to generation to generation until the coming of Jesus. Now, why God chose to do it that way, I don't know. He could have caused Jesus to have been born hundreds of years earlier instead of working through the generations of Abraham. But God didn't do it that way. And God being God, he can do it any way he wants to. This is God's world. God made it. And God can control the events of history any way he decides. But here's the point. God has a plan, and he is working that plan out through time, over time, through the lives of people. And what that means for you is that whatever happens in this life, an illness, a layoff, the death of a loved one, no matter what happens in life, God is in charge, and you are going to be okay. Yes, you're going to be okay. Even if sometimes things change suddenly and doesn't look like it. That's what happened to Joseph. Joseph had grown up, and he had worked his way up. And he was now in control of all of Potiphar's assets. But then things took an unexpected turn. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." Whoa. Joseph didn't ask for that. Joseph didn't need that. Joseph didn't want that. Only trouble could come from that. But Potiphar's wife was persistent. And after Joseph refused all of her advances, you can imagine how that might have played out. Humiliated, angry, Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of rape. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. He was there in prison. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is where we're going to have to leave Joseph today. But what a journey he's had up to this point. From being in a dark pit to the almost pinnacle of power, and then in a dark prison. What next? Well, by now though, you may have a clue. Maybe you can anticipate something. And Joseph was there in prison. but the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. That's how God is. God is with his people. We are never alone. Even so, trouble, even double trouble, like a pit and a prison, these things can and do befall God's people. And the question for us is, well, what's God going to do now with Joseph? Would God be with Joseph and comfort him in prison all the days of his life until he finally died? Or would God stir up all of the prisoners? And would there be a revolt and a massive jailbreak? Or would there be an earthquake and all the prison doors would swing open? We don't know yet. But we do know one thing. This I know, that God is for me. In God, whose word I praise. In the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What happens in your life, good or bad, God is with you, and God is for you, and God is with you, and you will be okay. It is one of the great themes found in the greatest story ever told. Amen. Come back. You got to come back.